Hi everyone, my name is Jason Andrade, and I am a student in CS 5704. The presentation is titled Agile Software Development, User Stories for Delivering Value to End Users. I will be describing in detail the topic of user stories. The following is the agenda for this video presentation. I will begin by giving a brief overview of Agile and Agile project methodologies used in industry. I will then describe what a user story is and provide an example. From there, I will then go on to describe the who, when, and why. I will ask an audience question and immediately follow up the answer to the question with a description of the attributes that make for a good user story, using the acronym INVEST. I will conclude the presentation by sharing my personal experience in having used user stories as a developer for a Scrum team. Before going too far in describing the ins and outs of user stories, it is important to first understand what is Agile. In software development, an Agile methodology is a way to manage a project by breaking it up into stages that allow for continuous improvement. And that also allows for a team to adapt to changes quickly. Agile is user-centered, meaning the focus is on delivering real value to the end user. The most common Agile methodologies are Scrum and Kanban. User stories fit neatly into both frameworks because user stories allow for greater flexibility, cooperation, and agility. Regardless of which Agile methodology the developer team uses during development, user stories are a simple way to gather customer requirements from the perspective of the user. Chapter 3 of Pressman did a great job in explaining how Agile project methodologies are put into practice, and so I recommend rereading this content. I'll be using Scrum for most of the presentation, as this is what I am most familiar with as a result of my own professional work experience. So, what is a user story? In short, it is the description of what a user wants a software product to do. In Agile, and especially when writing user stories, everything should be expressed from the perspective of the user. User stories are written in plain English as they are functional in nature. Technical verbiage should be avoided. This is because the intent of a user story is to deliver value to the end user, not technical requirements and specs to a developer. User stories should not be too wordy. They should be short and concise. A user story is made up of the following elements: title, description, and acceptance criteria. The title of a user story follows a basic formula. As a user, I want to perform an action so that expectation or outcome desired to be achieved by the user. The title is expressed as a persona and the action in the form of an objective. The title also includes the outcome we are trying to satisfy. There is also the description and the acceptance criteria. The description is a short explanation of the user's journey, and it can include use cases and general information that helps in explaining the title. Once again, it should not be technical or written from the perspective of a developer or a systems architect. The acceptance criteria for user story are conditions to validate the implementation of the user story. Acceptance criteria are used to confirm when the user story is completed. The following is an example of how a user story should be written. Once again, when writing a user story, the goal is to feel empathy for the end user, and so it should be written from their perspective. The following example is for a mobile app that is a simple to-do list. Now that we know how to write a user story, the question then is, who writes the user stories? Generally, it is the product owner who writes the user stories, as they are the ones who elicit the requirements from the stakeholders. However, any member of the Agile team can contribute user stories throughout the life of the project. It is not only the product owner who can write user stories. It is encouraged and even expected for team members, such as developers, to write user stories as a result of their interactions with stakeholders. As user stories are created, they are added to the product backlog. The product owner is responsible for creating the initial set of user stories and is also responsible for managing the product backlog. As user stories are created, the product owner ensures they meet the required criteria and are prioritized appropriately. When do we write user stories? As mentioned previously, user stories are written throughout the life of the project. User stories can be created at any time and are then added to the product backlog. To understand why user stories are written and their benefits, we must remember that in Agile, the objective is to create value for the user. User stories came into existence because of the need to break down projects into smaller, incremental segments for sprints. It is then easier to keep the focus on user satisfaction. In my opinion, this is best understood by people who have experienced working in both Agile and Waterfall, and then comparing. For example, in Scrum, working with user stories helps sprint teams make estimations, prioritize tasks, and plan sprints. This leads to greater flexibility and agility. User stories are incredibly helpful in keeping team members focused on the attributes that create business value. Because the end goal is well defined with the user story, team members are better able to think critically and creatively about how to solve for the end goal. My favorite part about user stories is that they create visible progress and results, especially when using Scrum boards. The team can see the momentum generated with each user story that is closed. With each user story that is moved to the done column, the team enjoys the feeling of a small win, which is great motivation. Before further discussing the benefits of a user story, I would like to ask the audience a few questions. Why are user stories not technical? Why are technical requirements avoided when writing a user story? What are the detriments? Please take a moment to think. Ready? Okay, let's answer these questions. Writing user stories that are too technical is a common mistake. Often, it is because the team members don't know how to write user stories, or because the work is not functional in nature and should not be a user story. A user story should not be technical because the technical aspects are not beneficial to the end user. When technical requirements or specs are captured, they are for the benefit of a developer, and they often create dependencies, therefore decreasing flexibility. Sometimes a user story begins to sound technical because it is too large and needs to be broken down into smaller user stories. Ultimately, user stories should be functional in order to better suit an agile framework. When determining the quality of a user story, it is recommended that the user story be assessed using a set of attributes that make for the acronym INVEST. INVEST stands for independent, negotiable, valuable, estimable, small, and testable. If a user story that is submitted to the backlog falls short for any of these attributes, it is recommended that the user story be rewritten. Much of what I've shared about Agile and user stories resonates with me as I've had professional work experience in applying these concepts. However, there are a few notable differences. These differences are the result of how I engage with my customers. My role is that of a consultant and not a traditional developer. My utilization always comes first, and my billable time and the scope of my work are typically well defined in the statement of work. This leaves little room for always delivering value to end users. The most significant difference is that all user stories are already documented once I am staffed. Developers rarely add user stories to the backlog. We spend a considerable amount of time clarifying requirements, but are discouraged from increasing scope. Also, there is rarely a product owner. Instead, there are project leads who have a strong relationship with the customer and who oversee all interactions with the stakeholders. Sprints are flexible, but certain aspects are rigid because of conflicting project milestones and deliverable deadlines. For those interested, I've included a link for a clip of my favorite show, Silicon Valley. It explains user stories and Scrum with a comedic twist. Fair warning, the content is not work appropriate and the humor is quite crude. Thank you.